Sure. So since late last month, Congresswoman, we've watched Russia invade Ukraine, sending hundreds of thousands of people streaming into neighboring countries to flee the violence. I would love your reflections on what you're seeing, not only as a member of Congress, member of the armed services community, but also as a refugee yourself. You grew up here in the Washington area, but your parents fled Vietnam in the late 70s when you were 6 months old, just 6 months old. The boat you all were on ran out of fuel, but you were rescued by a U.S. Navy vessel. Do I have that right? And talk about what your story, how that informs what you're watching and how you're responding to what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, so let me just first say that my heart is just breaking for the Ukrainian people. And I am also just incredibly inspired by their courage. It's not the exact same kind of parallel because I came from a country, Vietnam was, not overrun by outside invaders the way that Ukraine is facing an unprovoked aggression by Russia. But when I look at these images of women and children and families fleeing violence, it reminds me of the stories that I grew up with in my own home of my parents talking about living in a war-torn country and worrying about the future for their children, wanting what we as all parents want, which is simply for our children to have a better life than the one that we had. Because they didn't feel like they could have that in Vietnam as a communist government was taking over and persecuting its own people. My parents decided that they'd take their chances at sea rather than to live on in darkness in this country where they were being oppressed and that their children wouldn't have a bright future. And so you're correct, we set off by boat when I was just 6 months old and ran out of fuel. And there we were dangerously adrift when the U.S. Navy came upon our ship and refueled us, resupplied us, and allowed us to make it to a Malaysian refugee camp. And then from there, Lutheran Church relocated us to Virginia. And so as I watch these images, it resonates deeply with me from a personal perspective. But from a professional perspective, I think it's so important that America stand up and stand beside these freedom-loving people who are trying to defend their country against this naked aggression. And they have a right to their sovereignty and their territorial integrity. And I just voted here in Congress on a resolution in support of Ukraine. And I look forward to voting for resources to back up our commitment to help the Ukrainian people.